Let me paint a picture for you. You're a kid again, laying on your bed playing your favorite handheld gaming system. Life is simple, games are fun, and the world is still full of wonder. Well, I think I cracked the code to relive those moments as a now dark and jaded adult. I recently bought a PSP Vita, and I hate to admit this, but this little device has radically changed my life. In fact, it has literally healed my brain. Let's talk about it. For the last 30 days, I have not played or consumed any video game content, with the exception of this PSP Vita, in an effort to heal my brain from the common issues known as choice overload and overstimulation. Now, while these concepts may not seem all that threatening, the effects can have serious consequences on our mental health, creativity, satisfaction, and even our drive in life. If I'm being honest, I had fallen victim to the trap of choice paralysis and overstimulation. The signs were subtle: mindlessly scrolling through my phone during loading screens, hopping between different games to cure my boredom, browsing the Steam or PlayStation store for deals and discounts, thinking buying a new game would somehow bring satisfaction, and yet it never did. And as a nerd, I have a very impressive gaming library spanning both physical and digital collections across a dozen different consoles. Despite having this massive library, I maintained an unquenchable thirst for more in order to recreate the joys of gaming I tasted as a kid. Year after year, my biggest weakness was the winter Steam sale, where I would obtain dozens of titles from my wish list for extremely low prices, and each year as my library grew, my enjoyment of the hobby diminished at alarming rates. Surely having tons of games was what I always dreamed of as a kid, right? So why couldn't I feel satisfied while gaming? For the longest time, I thought that this was the result of simply getting older, and that eventually gaming would cease to be exciting altogether. At least until I heard of the minimalist movement. My wife was the one who exposed me to the concept of tech minimalism, which initially was very off-putting considering I am a tech nerd and game collector. However, watching her journey into decentralizing technology eventually sparked my interest. I began to research the concept of overstimulation, decision fatigue, and the paradox of choice, which exposed in me the need for my brain to heal. This revelation led me to creating my own self-imposed gaming challenge, and the results were shocking. Today, I want to share with you my 30-day minimalist challenge, PSP Vita Edition. Welcome back to the channel, my nerds. Hope you're having a great day. Let's get into it. Before explaining the challenge, it will be really beneficial to discuss in brief the choice paralysis from a clinical perspective. We can define choice paralysis as the inability to make a decision due to overwhelming number of options. According to several studies, when an individual is facing choice paralysis, the results can include anxiety, dissatisfaction, and even frustration. Perhaps the most notable study on this subject is the JAM study. In this famous study by Sheena L. Linger and Mark Lepper, customers in a supermarket were offered either 6 jars or 24 jars of jam to taste. More customers stopped at the 24 jam table, but only 3% of them bought the jam, compared to 30% of those who stopped at the table with 6 jams. The customers who bought the jam from the smaller selection were notably happier with their choice. Now, given my ever-increasing video game library and my ever-decreasing enjoyment, I thought it best to undergo a radical experiment to see if I could once again induce the euphoria I experienced as a kid while gaming. And so I concocted a self-imposed rule set, which I call the 30-Day Minimalist Challenge, PSP Vita Edition. Now, the rules for this challenge are simple and very straightforward. The first rule is for the next 30 days, I could only play my PSP Vita. Second rule is I could only play one title at a time, and I could change that title upon beating the first game. And the last rule, no cheats, no hacks, and no mods. I had to play vanilla. The intentions behind these rules were to drastically reduce my library options by locking myself into a single console and a single game to reverse my choice fatigue, overstimulation, and mental clutter while playing said game in its vanilla format, or as it was intended to be played. As a kid, I had far fewer games and yet found each of them more enjoyable. thus creating my challenge and hypothesis. Now, I originally planned to run this challenge with the PSP version of Final Fantasy X, but in order to eliminate my potential bias, I wanted to experiment with a game I've never played prior, so I chose Persona 4 Golden. My rationale was that I wanted to avoid relying on nostalgia to induce fondness for gaming, and instead rely on the rule set derived from my previously mentioned studies. As mentioned before, results from this experiment were shocking, and I would like to share some of the reflections that I documented during my challenge during the last 30 days. During this challenge, I was able to experience gaming in new settings. I am mostly a PC gamer and consequently am often locked into my office where I sit at my desk. However, the PSP Vita allowed a newfound freedom. Initially, I would play the PSP at my desk, but soon found it vastly inferior to the coziness of my bed or couch. I could game anywhere, and that opened up a whole new world of adventures outside of my man cave. I even found a hidden coffee shop in town and began frequenting its empty seats with nothing but my Vita and Persona 4. Sometimes I would sit indoors and enjoy locally grown mango smoothies, while other times I would sit on the terrace overlooking the Indian Ocean. This coffee shop became a haven, allowing my once beloved hobby to blossom once more. I didn't realize how badly I needed to get out of my office and get fresh air until I was truly untethered from my PC. Over those 30 days, life began to slow down, and gaming became less about escaping reality, but rather enjoying my hobby within a grounded reality where I was becoming more connected to myself. This was beautiful, but also revealing as I began to face the truth of suppressed anxieties that were lurking within myself and often kept buried under busyness. Because I was no longer scrolling through my gaming library to find something to play, I was able to jump into gaming so much faster, especially when you consider the form factor of the Vita. I found myself constantly pocketing this device and bringing it basically everywhere. One of my favorite places to bring my Vita was the gym. I normally spend an hour lifting weights and roughly 30 minutes on the treadmill for some steady state cardio. And let me tell you, those 30 minutes flew by when I had my Persona 4 and Vita. And yes, the Switch and the Steam Deck have similar portable markets, but the Vita just fits so well within my pocket that it really became a no-brainer approach to taking it on the go. And speaking of travel, I also had a 26-hour international flight during my minimalist challenge. At first, I was nervous knowing how ADD I can be and didn't think that one game could carry me through the entire 26 hours, but to my surprise, it was an incredible experience. And for context, during my last international flight, I brought my Switch and about 13 games, of which I cycled through during the first hour, eventually got bored, and then ended up playing the on-flight movie and then went to sleep. This time I was committed to a single game and was experiencing sustained excitement about Persona 4 the entire flight. This sustained enjoyment became a regular experience the further I went into this 30-day challenge. You might think that I would eventually grow bored of playing just one game, but actually, my interest in the story, characters, and yes, even the NPCs had a positive growth relationship. I began to slow down and not play with an anxious, rush-through-it tendency. I was able to really soak in the content, and it really reminded me of how I would play as a kid, carefree, taking my time, and having just genuine fun. I was no longer skipping through dialogue that felt unimportant. Instead, I read it with curiosity and often contemplation. One of the most unexpected side effects of this challenge was its impact on my relationship with my phone. And I hate to admit this, but I was someone who would check my phone mindlessly. However, as this challenge continued, I noticed my interest in my phone began to dull, and eventually I deleted all distracting apps and my social media altogether. I couldn't help but notice the anxiousness my phone would induce, and it clashed drastically with the calmness that my Vita offered. The lack of doom scrolling and constant barrage of political conversations online was really the tipping point for me. My world got quieter, and when I gamed, it felt bright again. The innocence and the enjoyment was blooming. There's something powerful about choosing what media you consume versus an algorithm telling you what you need to be watching. At the end of this challenge, I found myself in a far calmer, less jittery state. I felt grounded and less anxious, and more importantly, I was able to recreate the joys of gaming that I experienced in my youth, which was the goal. Despite playing Persona 4 Golden for an entire month, I couldn't beat it, but in this case, I consider that to be a positive since I really wanted to take my time enjoying the experience. My main takeaways for anyone watching this who might also find themselves feeling unsatisfied with their gaming experiences like myself is to try a challenge. Even if you don't have a PSP Vita, I really recommend limiting yourself to a single game for an extended period of time to help heal your brain from overstimulation and choice fatigue. I also think that this concept of minimalism may also be a key to living a happier life in general. And so I see myself implementing this in other parts of my life. I'm probably most thankful for the renewed love of JRPGs because I burned myself out over the years, but between the imposed restrictions of the challenge and Persona 4, I really gained a new appreciation for the genre, which, if you like this video, I highly recommend listening to my Persona 4 retrospective video, where I discuss in depth the beauty of this game because it's an absolute must for gamers. Even if you aren't a JRPG fan, I really recommend giving Persona 4 Golden a try. Now, all the studies that I mentioned in this video will be linked below, and I hope to see you over in the retrospective. Until then, bye-bye.